chairwoman of the House Republican Conference, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik from the great state of New York. Congresswoman, chairwoman, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us here again on Breitbart News Saturday.
Good to be with you, Matt. I'm driving in my district, about to go to an event with upstate New York Patriots, and it's a beautiful day.
Amazing. So ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, let's get ready for the main event. The January 6th committee has finally announced that they're going to begin the three-ring circus for real next week. Thursday night, they have noticed a primetime hearing at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, this coming Thursday. The January 6th committee finally beginning the three-ring circus. What should we expect at the three-ring circus, Congresswoman?
We should expect that it continues to be Nancy Pelosi's partisan political witch hunt. This is unconstitutional. This committee was not put together according to the rules of the House. There is no true legislative or oversight purpose. It is about smearing and punishing their political opponents. And what I find interesting, Matt, and really appalling, is the fact that most committees in Congress start in the morning. That's the business hours, but not this committee, because all they care about is trying to take back the narrative to try to target patriotic Trump supporters across the country and not even focus on the main issue, which is how we can make sure the Capitol has adequate security. They have failed to address that main issue, let alone the fact that they're doing absolutely no work to address any of the crises that the American people are facing, whether it's the inflation crisis, the sky-high gas prices, the border crisis, the baby formula crisis. So it is going to be a circus, but it is a political witch hunt.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's what I don't understand is why are there not primetime hearings on the gas price is out of control? I mean, the last 7 days straight, we've seen a new record set with gas prices. Why are there not primetime hearings on the border crisis? We've seen millions of people streaming across the border thanks to Joe Biden's open border policies. Why are we not seeing primetime hearings on, as you mentioned, the baby formula shortage crisis? I mean, there's any number of other things too. I mean, this is what they decide. They decide to spend their political capital. They decide to make their choice that the big thing that they're going to do primetime hearings on in the lead up to this midterm election is looking back to the last election rather than solving the problems facing Americans today.
Well, it's not just that they're not hosting primetime hearings. They're not hosting any hearings on the border crisis, on the inflation crisis, on the crime crisis. They only host a baby formula hearing after I, as the leader of the House Republican Conference, blasted them from the steps of the U.S. Capitol because they were doing nothing. So it is shameful. I believe the Democrats know that a red wave is coming. They are doubling down, looking for any desperate attempt to try to change the narrative. But look, the American people are smart. They see through this. They want a Congress that's focused on the issues that matter to them, which is why we are working so hard as Republicans to earn the support, because we're going to address the inflation by reining in reckless spending. We're going to address the border crisis by securing the border and returning back to President Trump's very effective border security policies. But, I think it's going to be a circus even more so than it was, all of last year as they tried to continue to really prosecute and target their political opponents.
Right. And so on that point about how they're worried about a red wave brewing here, I think you saw this as well from the president's speech earlier this week on this gun control push. I was shocked when I watched that address. And again, notable, I think, in comparison to this whole thing with the January 6th thing, that they picked a primetime address from the president to do this. But in the speech, he specifically called on people to vote out people that don't bend to his will. I haven't seen a president get that political in a primetime address from the White House in a long time. And again, it seems like all of these things that the Democrats are doing, whether it's the gun control push, whether it's this January 6th push, etc., is they're trying to counter-program and try to change the conversation off of the things that people are focused on going into this midterm election, that Republicans are clearly going to win on, onto things that they think they're going to win on.
Well, it's heartless and it's shameless. And after such a horrific tragedy in Uvalde, and every American, no matter what your political beliefs, your hearts go out to those poor families. As a young mother, my heart breaks. It's the worst fear of any parent. And for the President of the United States to try to politicize this and put a wedge between the American people on an issue that's been on the priority list for Democrats for decades, it is shameful. And what's also shameful, and they absolutely did a horrible job, the new White House press secretary, this White House is refusing to engage in any focus on how we actually harden schools, how we make sure that schools have adequate school resource officers, adequate training, adequate funding when it comes to making sure that we have the best possible security for our most vulnerable, our kids. So it was shameful of the President of the United States. And what I'm really proud of is our Republican who actually represents Uvalde, Tony Gonzalez. He has been in touch every single day with members of his community, mourning, making sure that we are focused on how we can, again, improve security, but most importantly, help this community they're never going to recover from this, but help them through this very difficult time. That was not what we saw from Joe Biden. Frankly, Tony Gonzalez has been way more presidential than the President of the United States.
I couldn't agree more. So, okay, getting back to the January 6th committee, you mentioned at the top there that this committee is, in your view, illegitimate in the way that it's set up. Can you explain that? Like, can you explain why this? Because from what I understand, the original resolution that was voted on to establish that committee has not been followed by the Democrat majority, in that it was supposed to be 8 Democrats, 5 Republicans. Yet that has not happened. The 5 Republicans that Leader McCarthy appointed to the committee were kicked off the committee by the Democrat majority. And as such, it seems like one could argue, and many people have, and this is currently before litigation in courts and so on and so forth. Several of the people are challenging the committee's legitimacy. That they have not followed the resolution that chartered and established the committee.
Well, you're exactly right. It is an illegitimate committee. They are not following the resolution as it was passed. You are correct that Kevin McCarthy, as the leader of the Republicans, appointed 5 Republicans to serve on the committee. And in an unprecedented step, Nancy Pelosi stripped multiple of those Republicans from being able to serve on the committee. Those are not her appointees. It's not her choice. But she took a step for the first time in the history of Congress to not allow Republicans to appoint their own members. In addition, you've had Benny Thompson, who's chair of the committee, refer to Liz Cheney as the ranking member. Liz Cheney is not the ranking member of that committee. She is not an appointee of Kevin McCarthy. She is a Pelosi appointee and a Pelosi puppet, and is doing anything and everything she can to help Democrats win this November.
On that note about the way that the committee is set up, again, Nancy Pelosi, just so our audience understands, appointed Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. They are not appointed by the Republicans. The members that Kevin McCarthy appointed to this committee, which were Jim Jordan, Jim Banks, and there were 3 other Republicans that Kevin McCarthy, the House Republican Conference, had appointed to the committee, were Jim Jordan and Jim Banks were kicked off of the committee, and then the other Republicans withdrew because of the unprecedented nature in which Nancy Pelosi had proceeded on this. Now, they've also subpoenaed several members of the House Republican Conference, everybody from, as we mentioned there, McCarthy to, I believe, Andy Biggs from Arizona, several others as well. I mean, this is like a unheard of. I've never heard of that before, Congresswoman. I've been covering Congress for over a decade. I've never heard of a member of Congress getting subpoenaed by another committee or something like that. I mean, what do you think about this? This is, it seems like, several of these steps, and then we saw the latest brazen actions against Peter Navarro, who served the country admirably during his time during the Trump administration. There's no reason to believe that Peter Navarro was some kind of a flight risk or something like that. He was getting on a flight to Nashville, Tennessee, and they went and arrested him yesterday. And then, by the way, after he went into court and and really challenged them and represented himself, at great risk to himself, by the way, to highlight this whole sham with the Justice Department, these contempt resolutions, etc. Apparently now the Justice Department has now said that, oh, wait, never mind on these other contempt resolutions. Maybe we aren't going to prosecute these ones that Congress has already voted on. So, but what I'm getting at here is that it seems like that more focus that gets drawn to this, this may actually end up, what I'm getting at here is this may actually end up being a blessing in disguise, in that the Democrats deciding to do this in prime time next week is going to put an intense focus on this whole sham that we're talking about here. And I think that the veil is going to slip, right? Like the mask is going to slip. People are going to see exactly what we're talking about here all across the country.
And it's similar to impeachment sham part 1, where, it wasn't primetime coverage, but it was wall-to-wall coverage. And the more the American people saw when it was out in the open and not in the basement skiff, the support for impeachment plummeted, because they saw that there was no evidence for or any impeachable offenses committed by President Trump. I believe that's going to be the same case with January 6th, is that, despite all Democrats and Liz Cheney, their top allies' effort, that the American people are going to say this is what they're focused on. This is, them targeting their political opponents. Meanwhile, the American people are suffering to pay their grocery bills, to fill up their gas tanks, to make sure their communities are safe. I do think this is going to politically backfire. And let me be clear, the only office that's off limits from this investigation or any type of questions is Nancy Pelosi's office. I was the Republican who led and said that the first, and now we know that it is the truth. Benny Thompson said that her office is off limits, whereas Mitch McConnell's office turned over all documents, all communications related to the security posture of the U.S. Capitol. Nancy Pelosi failed to do that and refused to do that. Why? Because she is covering up. Because there were concerns about security that were raised with Speaker Pelosi's office. She was concerned about political optics, and the Capitol was left vulnerable on that day. The American people deserve to know why Nancy Pelosi isn't releasing those documents, and they deserve to know full transparency.
Yeah, so now, Chairwoman, I'm glad you mentioned the comparison here back to impeachment part 1, because that was the moment that I think you really hit a national stage, right? Like, everybody remembers you fighting back on the Intelligence Committee against Adam Schiff and this crazy nonsense that they were doing against President Trump back then. And from what I understand now, as the House Republican conference chair, because you replaced Liz Cheney as the House GOP conference chair when she decided to throw in stock with the Democrats, the House Republican conference ousted her. They elected you. From what I understand, you are going to be leading the counter-programming effort here in the fight back effort, the counter-messaging effort by House Republicans against this primetime event next week. So can you tell us about your plans to do, what you're going to be doing? How are you going to fight back against this? What are some things that you've got lined up?
Well, we're working very closely with President Trump and his team, with leader Kevin McCarthy, with Jim Jordan, and really all of the House Republicans will be pushing back in a rapid response fashion. You will see us all over the airwaves. We will be setting the record straight. We will be telling the truth to the American people, sharing the facts, and also really pointing out how unprecedented and unconstitutional and illegitimate this committee is. We have a lot of media bookings already set. I know that many of our members are going to shine in this moment, but similar to impeachment sham 1 and really impeachment sham 2, just out there every single day, number 1, talking about issues that matter to the American people, but number 2, prosecuting the case against how much Speaker Pelosi, Democrats, and Liz Cheney have failed this country, and they've failed to focus on the issue. If they want to talk about securing the Capitol, which they've refused to, they have failed to do that job. And in the meantime, they have shred constitutional precedents. They have shred Congress as an institution. And they are invading on the privacy and really the speech and debate rights of all these elected members of Congress. And they're targeting everyday citizens, young staffers who worked on the Trump campaign. It's outrageous. These legal bills for these staffers are bankrupting these young families. So we'll be out there leading every single day.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And so the last thing I would ask you here is that it sounds like you relish a good fight. It sounds like you're ready to roll. tell us, what are your thoughts going into next week? It's Elise versus Nancy next week, right? Like, and frankly, I bet on Elise every time in that fight, right? Like, because you've won this fight before with the Democrats whenever they've tried this kind of nonsense before. So you relish this good fight. It sounds like going into next week. Again, what are your thoughts? How does this end for the left and for the Democrats?
The left is vicious. The left has been vile. They have targeted me so much in a vicious way. And I'm going to stand up for my constituents and the American people and continue to speak the truth and work with all of the House Republicans, with Kevin McCarthy, with Jim Jordan, to make sure that the facts are out there for the American people to know and expose what Nancy Pelosi does not want the American people to know, which is that her office is the only one off limits and that she bears responsibility for the security posture. And if they want to provide excuses, which is what they always do to push back in the media, then turn over the documents. Where are the documents? Where are the communications, Nancy? Until she does that, we know that she bears responsibility.